It's a strange thing. A phone call at 3 a.m., it feels wrong, as if the world has paused for a moment and you're the only person who's still awake. A lot of you know that feeling, that sudden jolt of adrenaline mixed with dread. Maybe you've had a similar call, the kind that makes your heart pound for no reason at all, the kind that tells you your life is about to change forever. I'm Amelia, and this is a story about the night I got that call. The night I realized that the house I grew up in, the family I thought I knew, and the life I had worked so hard to escape were all about to come crashing down. Before I dive into my story, I'd really appreciate it if you could let me know where you're watching from in the comments, and if you'd consider subscribing to my channel. It would mean the world to me and help me keep sharing more stories like this. Thank you so much for being here. Amelia's phone rang at 3 a.m. It was a sound that didn't just break the silence, it shattered it, leaving a jagged void in the quiet of my Chicago apartment. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize, and a cold dread coiled in my stomach. The last time a call came this late, it was my grandmother's funeral. I braced myself. The voice on the other end was my mother's, Eleanor, but it was thin, a frayed wire of a sound I barely recognized. "Amelia," she whispered, her voice a brittle thing. "Is that you?" "Mom, it's 3 a.m. What's wrong?" I asked, my voice still thick with sleep. The dread intensified. It was a familiar feeling, one that had followed me from the sprawling suburban house of my childhood, a constant, low-grade hum of anxiety that only came from living in a family where no one ever said what they meant. "You have to come home," she said, her voice trembling. "Now, Juliet, something's happened." My mind raced. Juliet was the golden child, my younger sister who had never had to leave. She was the one who was supposed to be safe, protected, the one who had always had everything. I had built my life from scratch, brick by brick, 1,000 miles away from their careful, quiet chaos. But even from a distance, it seemed impossible to escape. "What happened to Juliet?" I pressed, my heart beginning to pound. I can't talk about it over the phone," she said, her voice cracking. "Just get in your car and come. Please, don't call anyone else. Just come." But it was what I heard in the background that truly made my blood run cold. A woman's high-pitched wail, sharp and furious, slicing through my mother's broken plea. It wasn't Juliet's voice. I knew that sound. It was Catherine, my cousin, the one who always watched from the periphery, her eyes holding a glint of something predatory. My mind flashed back to a family dinner a few months ago. Catherine had been unusually quiet, watching my father with an intensity that made my skin crawl. Now, the sound of her raw, unrestrained fury was a terrible omen. I hung up and got dressed, my hands fumbling with the buttons of my coat. I didn't take time to shower or even brush my hair. The city lights of Chicago slowly gave way to the quiet. Dark streets of the suburbs I had once called home. The 4-hour drive was a blur of headlights and road signs. Every mile felt like a step back in time. I had spent so long creating a life of clean lines and emotional distance, and now I was being pulled back into the messy, complicated web of my family's secrets. The house came into view, a grand monument to a life I had left behind. It was large and imposing, a silent witness to 1,000 quiet arguments and unspoken betrayals. The front door was unlocked, a detail that was jarringly out of place. My parents were meticulous, obsessed with security, both physical and emotional. I stepped inside and the air felt different, stale. There was a kind of emotional cold that seemed to settle in the furniture, seeping into the very walls. My mother was in the living room, standing perfectly still, like a statue. She was staring at a blank space on the wall, a pale rectangle where a painting had hung for as long as I could remember. It was a portrait of my father, an inheritance from his own mother, and it was the centerpiece of the room. Now, it was just a void. My younger sister, Juliet, was curled on the couch, her face streaked with tears. Her phone lay on the floor, its screen shattered. "He's gone, Amelia," she sobbed, her voice raw. "Our art is gone." I didn't understand. My parents' art collection was their pride and joy. It was the foundation of their identity, the proof of their wealth and good taste. "What are you talking about?" I asked. My voice calmed despite the rising panic in my chest. "All of it," my mom said, her voice completely devoid of emotion. A blank sheet of paper. "Your father sold it. All of it. The famous Renaissance collection, the ancient vases, the family heirlooms. All gone." My heart dropped, but a new emotion, an ugly twist of betrayal, bloomed in its place. "Why?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. My mom just shook her head as if she couldn't comprehend it either. He had to," she said, her voice barely audible. "He had some debts, but it's all fine. It's fine." But a new voice cut through the air, one filled with a venomous sweetness. "It's not fine, Aunt Eleanor, not when he sold the house too." My stomach dropped. I turned and saw Catherine standing in the doorway, a smirk playing on her lips. She held a manila envelope in her hands. "What are you talking about, Catherine?" my mom said, her voice rising in panic. "The house?" Catherine said, her eyes fixed on me. "Your husband sold it to a shell company, and he put the deed in my name." I felt the ground shift under my feet. It was a betrayal on a scale I couldn't comprehend. My father had sold everything, the house, the art, the memories. All of it was gone, and he had given the deed to my cousin, a person who had always been a stranger. "But why?" I asked, my voice shaking. "Why would he do that?" "He said it was to protect us," my mom said, her eyes empty. He said he was making sure we would always have a place to live, that he was putting the house in a safe name." "A safe name," I scoffed. "And that's Catherine, our cousin, who hasn't been here in years." He said it was the only way," my mom said, her voice barely audible. I knew there was more to it. There had to be. I was a designer, a person who saw the world in patterns and blueprints, and this whole situation was like a giant, convoluted blueprint. It was a mess, and I knew I had to be the one to untangle it. The next morning, I went to my dad's old office. It was a dusty room at the back of the house that no one ever used. No one but him, of course. He kept all his secret papers and his books on art history. My fingers traced the spines of the books, each one an echo of the past. I didn't know what I was looking for, but I knew there was something here, something that would explain why he would do something like this. My years as a designer gave me a strange advantage. I saw things in patterns, in blueprints, and this whole situation was like a giant, convoluted blueprint. I found a hidden compartment in his desk, a small button behind a book, and inside, a flash drive and a journal. It was my chance to figure out what was really going on. I plugged the flash drive into my laptop, my fingers shaking as I clicked the file. It was a series of bank transactions, large sums of money, all funneled into an offshore account. But then I heard a sound outside the door, the click of a lock. I froze, my heart in my throat. I ducked under the desk, holding my breath. As the door slowly creaked open, it was Juliet. She walked in, not crying anymore, and her face was cold and calculating. She wasn't a victim. She was searching. She started pulling open the drawers, frantically looking for something. Her eyes darted around the room, then landed on a small book on the bookshelf. Her eyes lit up as she grabbed it, a triumphant smirk on her face. She hid it in her pocket. As she walked out, she didn't even look at the floor. She didn't see me. I was a ghost in my own family, and I was about to find out exactly why. I had to confront them, but not just with a flash drive. I had a plan. I spent the day going through the documents, the journal, and the audio files I found on the flash drive. It was all a terrible knot of secrets. My dad had fallen into debt and, in a desperate attempt to fix things, had tried to make a deal with an art buyer. Catherine was the connection. She had introduced him to the buyer, and in exchange, she would get a cut of the profits, but the buyer scammed them both. And so, they resorted to selling the art to pay off the debt. And what about the house? The house was not sold to Catherine. The shell company my dad sold it to was actually Catherine's company. She was using it to launder money. And this house was the perfect front. I also found an old audio recording on the drive. It was a conversation between Juliet and my dad. Her voice, cold and demanding, filled the air. Dad, if you don't give me the money, I will tell Mom about all this. All of it. The debt, the art, everything. She was blackmailing him. She wasn't an innocent victim. She had been in on it all along. She had known all of it. I had to expose them all. Not just my dad, but the whole web of lies. That night, my mom held a small gathering for her closest friends. I walked into the living room, my phone in my hand, and hit play. Dad, if you don't give me the money, I will tell Mom. My sister's voice filled the room. The friends looked at her, shocked. My mom looked at me, her eyes wide with a mix of fury and disbelief. Amelia, what are you doing? She whispered. The truth, I said, my voice steady. That's what I'm doing. I looked at Juliet, whose face had gone pale. You knew all of it, didn't you? All of it, and you just watched while I was being blamed for everything. She didn't say anything, she just looked at the ground. Then my mom, with a single slow shake of her head, said, My dear child is no longer here. Juliet, now there's only a stranger. A person who has torn this family apart. Her words weren't directed at Juliet. They were directed at me. She had made her choice. She had chosen to blame me. And I knew, right then and there, that I was done. The party ended, not with a bang, but with a sudden, suffocating silence. The guests, friends of my mother, slipped out like ghosts, their faces a mix of confusion and pity. Juliet and Catherine had already fled, a whirlwind of shame and self-preservation. My mother stood in the center of the living room, a solitary figure among the empty wine glasses and the remnants of a life that was now in ruins. I didn't stay to watch her. I walked into the kitchen, the one room in the house I always felt comfortable in. The sterile white countertops and the cold gleam of the stainless steel felt like a fortress. I poured myself a glass of water, the tremor in my hand making the ice clink against the glass. What was that? My mother's voice cut through the silence. She was standing in the doorway, her arms crossed, her eyes hard and unreadable. Not sad, just empty. The truth. Mom, I said, not turning around, I just told the truth. You humiliated us, she said, her voice rising slightly. In front of everyone. You destroyed this family. I finally turned to face her. Destroyed it, Mom. There was nothing left to destroy. This family was built on a lie. It's always been about who was most useful, most charming, who made you look the best, and that was never me. She flinched, a small, involuntary movement of her hand. That's not fair. I loved you both equally. Did you? I asked, and the question hung in the air, heavy with decades of unspoken resentment. Do you remember when Juliet had her recital at the conservatory? You flew to New York to get her the perfect dress. Do you remember when I got into a top-tier architecture school, you told me it was a waste of money because I'd just get married anyway? The words came out without a filter. Each one a stone I had been carrying for years. I fixed the plumbing, I changed the light bulbs, I kept the books. I was the one who made sure the house didn't fall apart while you and Juliet were out getting your nails done. I was the handyman. Mom. And she was the daughter. My mother's face went slack. She didn't deny it. She just looked at me, a stranger in her own kitchen. That's what I was to you, I said, my voice dropping to a whisper. A service, a convenience. You didn't want a daughter, you wanted a handyman with emotional amnesia. She tried to speak, but no words came out. The silence stretched between us, a vast, unbridgeable chasm. I took the blank check I'd written earlier and placed it on the counter. This is all I can do for you, I said, the words feeling foreign on my tongue. And this is me telling you goodbye. I walked past her, my eyes fixed on the front door. The house felt like a museum now, a place of historical significance, but no longer a home. I opened the door and stepped out into the cold night air. The air was crisp, clean, and free of the heavy scent of lies. I didn't slam the door. No one said a word. The air was thick with unspoken words, with anger, with sadness. Juliet and Catherine left without a word. My mom stood there, still and silent. She didn't say anything, she didn't apologize, and I didn't expect her to. I walked into the kitchen, wrote a check, and put it on the counter. It was blank. "This is all I can do for you," I said, my voice soft but firm. "I'll be leaving now." I walked out of the house, no one following me, no one trying to stop me. I didn't look back. The silence was a new kind of freedom. I went back to my apartment in Chicago. The next day, I took out an old photo album, a gift from my grandma. It had a picture of my parents, Juliet and me. We were all smiling. It felt like a different lifetime. I tore the picture into little pieces, not out of anger, but out of peace. It was a way of letting go. A way of letting go of the anger, the sadness, and the lies. A way of letting go of a family that never really existed. I didn't get an apology. I didn't get any of the money. I didn't get any of the art. I didn't get the closure that people talk about. But I got something better. I got freedom. I got peace. And that was more than enough.